I never imagined my marriage would turn into a puzzle I had to piece together like some detective in a bad crime novel. But here I was, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, staring at a crumpled note I just pulled from the glove compartment of my wife's car. No name.
No signature.
Just a few words scrawled in messy handwriting. I can't stop thinking about last night. You are intoxicating. My heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. This wasn't mine. Anna and I had been married for 6 years, and while we weren't newlyweds anymore, our relationship wasn't bad. Or so I had thought. I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was from a friend. Maybe it was an old note she forgot about. Maybe I was being a complete fool. I tossed the note onto the passenger seat and exhaled slowly, trying to settle the storm brewing inside me. If I confronted her now, she'd have a perfectly reasonable explanation. She was good with words, my Anna. Always had a way of making me feel ridiculous for even asking questions. The thought of her laughing off my suspicion made me sick. I needed more. That night, I waited up for her, pretending to be half asleep on the couch when she walked in. She had that flushed look, the one I used to think was just from being out late with her classmates. "Hey, babe," she said, leaning down to kiss me. I caught a whiff of her perfume. Stronger than usual, almost like she'd reapplied it right before coming inside. "Hey," I murmured, feigning exhaustion. "How was class?" She hesitated just for a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but I did. "It was fine," she said, kicking off her heels. "Tiring. You know how it is." I did. Or at least I thought I did. I let it go. For now. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I went through her car again, hoping to find something, anything, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. That's when I noticed it. Her GPS history. One of the most recent locations wasn't our home, her university, or even a coffee shop. It was an address I didn't recognize. My hands were clammy as I copied it into my phone. A quick search told me everything I needed to know. It was an apartment complex. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure I wanted the truth. I sat in my car outside the apartment complex, fingers drumming against the steering wheel, my stomach twisted in knots. I told myself I was just here to confirm. Nothing more. No crazy accusations, no dramatic confrontations. Just cold, hard facts. The problem was, I already knew the facts. The love note, the extra effort she'd been putting into her appearance lately, the secrecy, the way she hesitated when I asked about class. And now, the GPS leading me to this place? I wasn't an idiot, but there's a difference between knowing something and seeing it with your own eyes. And I wasn't ready for the latter just yet. So I waited. The parking lot was half empty, mostly older sedans and compact cars. The kind you'd expect from students or young professionals just trying to get by. It wasn't a fancy place. Nothing like the upscale cafes or lecture halls Anna usually spent her time in. Which meant whoever she was seeing lived a pretty normal life. Someone unremarkable. Somehow that made it worse. After about 20 minutes, a movement near the entrance caught my eye. I sank lower in my seat, heart hammering. Anna. She stepped out of the building, her face glowing in the soft evening light. She was smiling, really smiling. Not the polite, tired one she gave me when she got home late. This was different. This was the way she used to smile at me. And then he followed. Tall, maybe in his late 40s, a salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, dressed in a button-down and slacks like some kind of off-brand George Clooney. Even from a distance, I could tell he had that charming older man energy, the kind that made women lean in when he talked. I didn't need a name to know who he was. Professor Matthew Caldwell. I remembered him from Anna's stories. The brilliant, charismatic professor who made everyone swoon in class. She had admired him, respected him, but admiration had clearly turned into something else. She touched his arm as they spoke, her body angled toward him like he was the center of her universe. And then, before I could even process what was happening, she leaned up and kissed him, right there in the open. Not a hesitant, stolen kiss. Not a mistake. A full, passionate, this has been going on for a while kind of kiss. My breath caught in my throat. The world around me seemed to warp, like everything had suddenly been thrown underwater. Anna. My Anna. My wife. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Part of me wanted to slam the car door open, march right up to them and demand answers. But I didn't. I forced myself to stay frozen, watching as my marriage unraveled before my eyes. When they finally pulled apart, she laughed at something he said, brushing her hair behind her ear the way she did when she was flirting. Then, she climbed into her car and drove away like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in my life. I sat there long after she was gone, staring at the professor as he casually walked back inside. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had she ever actually been at class when she said she was? Had she come home to me right after being with him? I felt sick. I needed a plan. This wasn't going to be some angry confrontation where I screamed and threw things. No, I needed to be smart. I needed to understand the full scope of this betrayal before I made my move. Because one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Anna's face, her face, tilted up toward his as she kissed him in the open like she had nothing to hide. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, even breathing of the woman who had just spent the evening in another man's arms. The weight of it settled on my chest like a brick. I wanted to confront her, to wake her up, shove the love note in her face, tell her I knew. But I needed to be smart. This wasn't just about me catching my wife cheating anymore. The moment I realized who she was cheating with, I knew this ran deeper. Because Matthew Caldwell wasn't just a professor. He was a married professor. A married professor sleeping with a student. That changed everything. I needed to gather more, but I didn't have time to sit around playing detective. I had a full-time job, responsibilities. But that's where technology came in. The next morning, while Anna was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. She was careful, no incriminating texts, no saved messages from him. But I checked her email and saw something that made my stomach flip. A calendar invite. Private meeting Dr. MC. I checked the details. His office. Tonight. It wasn't much, but it was enough. By the time she came out, wrapped in a towel, smiling at me like nothing was wrong, I had already set my plan in motion. "Morning, babe," she said, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek before heading to her closet. I barely slept. So much work piling up for finals. I forced a smile. "Yeah? Anything I can do to help?" "No, just the usual. Late night at the library again." "Library, right?" I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I let her leave for class as usual. Watched her go through the motions of our life together, kissing me goodbye at the door, tossing me a love you over her shoulder like it meant something. I waited exactly 15 minutes before grabbing my keys. Tonight I was going to find out just how deep this mess went. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was parked outside Caldwell's office building. The university was mostly empty at this hour. A few students lingered, but the faculty wing was deserted. I found a side door and slipped in. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't about to get myself arrested for trespassing, so I stuck to the shadows, moving quietly down the hallway. His office was at the far end, light glowing from underneath the door. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. Right on time. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering as I heard muffled voices inside. Anna's voice. His. Then, a soft click. The lock. I clenched my fists. I needed to see for myself. I had come this far, there was no turning back. There was a vent high up on the wall, the kind that led to the adjacent storage room. The maintenance door was open, giving me access. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I climbed up, pressing my eye to the slatted vent just in time to see Anna sitting on the edge of Caldwell's desk, her fingers brushing against his tie. He leaned in, murmuring something too low for me to hear. She laughed, and then, she pulled him in by the collar and kissed him. A full-body kind of kiss. The kind I hadn't gotten from her in a long time. The air left my lungs. I should have turned away, should have climbed down and left. But I didn't, because what happened next changed everything. A knock at the door. Anna pulled back, looking startled. Caldwell swore under his breath. That's not supposed to. The knock came again, more urgent this time. I watched as Caldwell straightened his shirt, motioning for Anna to stay quiet. He cracked the door open just an inch. That's when I heard her voice. A woman's voice. Matt, open the door. We need to talk. Now. Anna's whole body stiffened. I couldn't see who it was, but from the way Caldwell's face paled, I knew. His wife. My pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't just a little affair. This was about to explode. And Anna was standing right in the middle of the blast zone. For a moment, everything stood still. Caldwell's wife was still outside, knocking harder, her voice sharp. Matt, I know you're in there. I barely breathed, pressing myself tighter against the vent. Below me, Anna looked like a deer caught in headlights. What do we do? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Caldwell hesitated, just for a second, then gestured for her to move toward the corner of the office, out of sight. She scrambled off the desk, fixing her shirt, her eyes wide. He exhaled sharply, straightened his tie, and finally unlocked the door. His wife shoved her way inside before he could even speak. She was a tall woman, maybe mid-40s, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked put together, polished. Too polished for someone who had just stormed into her husband's office uninvited. Her eyes scanned the room like a bloodhound. Where is she? Caldwell forced out a dry laugh. What the hell are you talking about, Julie? She turned on him so fast he actually flinched. Don't patronize me, she snapped. I got a call today, from another student's boyfriend. Seems you've been real busy. I almost slipped off the ledge. Another student's boyfriend? Anna wasn't the only one. Caldwell's face went rigid. Julie, listen to me. Shut up, she hissed. She reached into her bag, pulled out a stack of papers, and threw them at him. They fluttered to the floor. Printouts of emails, text messages, photos, evidence. She'd caught him. This is everything, she seethed. Your late-night meetings, your little coffee dates. You really thought I wouldn't figure it out. Caldwell bent down slowly, flipping through the pages. This isn't what you think it is. Julie let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Spare me, she said, and don't ever step foot in our house again. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Anna, still hidden, pressed her back against the bookshelf, hand over her mouth. I had never seen her look so terrified. Caldwell took a step toward his wife, hands up. Julie, please, let's talk about this. She cut him off with a slap. It wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of that office, it sounded like a gunshot. Caldwell staggered back, his cheek red. Julie took one last disgusted look at him, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. For a long time he just stood there, rubbing his jaw, staring at the mess of paper on the floor. Then he let out a low, bitter laugh. Well, he muttered, that could have gone better. Anna swallowed hard. What happens now? Caldwell sighed, running a hand through his hair. She doesn't know about you, he said, which means we can still fix this. Anna looked at him like he was insane. Fix what? You're about to lose your wife. What about your job? What if she goes to the university? She won't, he said quickly. She's too private. She'll want to keep this quiet. That buys us time. Anna looked unconvinced. Caldwell reached for her hands, his voice dropping into something smooth, coaxing. Anna, I need you to trust me. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. That same tone, that same charm, the same tricks he probably used on every woman before her. And she fell for it. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. He smiled. We'll figure this out, okay? Anna nodded hesitantly. That's when I knew. It didn't matter that his life was crumbling around him. It didn't matter that he'd just been exposed. Caldwell wasn't done. And neither was I. I climbed down from the vent as quietly as I could, slipped out the way I came, and made it back to my car without looking back. My hands were shaking when I gripped the steering wheel. Anna had no idea what she had walked into, but she would soon, because now, I wasn't just looking for proof anymore. I was looking for payback. I spent the next few days playing dumb. It wasn't easy. Every time I looked at Anna, I saw her in that office, pressed against the bookshelf, eyes full of fear while Caldwell sweet-talked her into believing they could fix this. But I needed her to think I was clueless. So I went through the motions. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings. I asked about her classes. I even pretended to be interested when she talked about how stressful her workload was getting. Meanwhile, I was planning my next move. Because one thing was clear. Anna wasn't the only one. Caldwell had other students. Multiple students. And if his wife knew about at least one other affair, that meant there was more out there. I just had to find it. The university had a private student forum, an online discussion board mostly used for selling old textbooks and complaining about professors. Anna had shown it to me once when she was ranting about a TA who graded too harshly. That's where I started. I made an anonymous account and searched for Caldwell's name. Most of the posts were normal students discussing his lectures, asking about assignments. But then I found a thread titled, "Avoid Caldwell's Private Tutoring Sessions at All Costs." My heart pounded as I clicked it open. The post was from 2 months ago. "Look, I don't want to start drama, but if you're a female student and Caldwell offers you extra help, just be careful. He plays favorites, and it's always the pretty ones. He gives out good grades if you entertain his offers. But if you say no, suddenly your grades start dropping." There were over 100 replies. Some people defended him, saying he was a great professor. Others hinted that they'd heard rumors. But buried in the comments, one stuck out to me. "If you want proof, talk to Lily K. She dropped his class out of nowhere last semester. Ask her why." I didn't waste time. I found her through social media. Lily Kim, a senior in the program. Her profile was private, but her bio mentioned she worked at a small cafe near campus. Perfect. The next morning, I stopped by, pretending I was just grabbing coffee. She was behind the counter, dark hair tied back, moving fast. When it was my turn, I ordered something random, then lowered my voice. "Hey, Lily?" She paused, eyeing me warily. "Yeah." I leaned in. "I need to ask you something about Matthew Caldwell." Her whole body went stiff. "Nope," she said immediately. "Not interested." I expected that. "Look," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'm not with the school. I'm not trying to cause trouble. But I know what happened to you. And I think my wife, Anna, is in the same situation." That got her attention. Her brows furrowed. "Anna Bennett?" I nodded. Lily exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over her face. "God, I warned her." I froze. "What?" She glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned forward. "I warned her months ago. I told her Caldwell was dangerous. But she didn't listen." I swallowed hard. "What did he do to you?" She hesitated. "I don't want to get into details, but he's a predator. He grooms students. At first, he makes you feel special, like you're the smartest person in the room, like you're the only one who understands him. Then he pushes boundaries. If you play along, you get the grades, the praise. If you don't, he makes your life hell." She looked away. I said no, and my straight A's turned into C's overnight. He made it impossible for me to pass. I had to withdraw. My hands curled into fists. I had been so focused on Anna's betrayal that I hadn't considered something worse, that she wasn't just cheating on me. She was being used. That night, when Anna got home, I was waiting. She kicked off her shoes, sighing. "God, what a day." I stayed silent. She glanced at me, finally noticing how tense I was. "Tim." I stood slowly. "I talked to Lily." Her face dropped. What?" I took a step forward. "She warned you, didn't she? Told you exactly what kind of man Caldwell is." Anna opened her mouth, but no words came out. I kept going. "And you ignored her. You chose to ignore her. Why, Anna? Why did you let him do this to you?" Her lower lip trembled. And then, she broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "It started off innocent. He was nice to me. He helped me when I was struggling. I thought he actually cared. I clenched my fists. But then she shook her head, wiping her eyes. It just happened. I let out a bitter laugh. It just happened? You've been sneaking around for months. Anna, you kissed him in his office. You let him. She flinched. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. I stared at her, disgust and heartbreak swirling together. You didn't just mess up, I said coldly. You ruined us. She looked up at me, pleading. Tim, please. But I was done. I grabbed my keys and walked out, because for the first time in this entire nightmare, I finally knew the truth. Anna hadn't just betrayed me, she had betrayed herself. And now we were both paying the price. I didn't go back home that night. Couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past me as I tried to make sense of everything. I had started this thinking Anna was just another unfaithful wife. Cliché. A woman who got bored and traded in her husband for something new. Something exciting. But this was something else entirely. Anna had been manipulated. Used. And the worst part? She let it happen. I pulled into an empty parking lot outside an old diner and killed the engine. My head was pounding. Everything Lily had said replayed in my mind. Caldwell wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator. A man who had perfected the art of finding vulnerable students and sinking his claws into them. He made them feel special, made them depend on him. And then, once he had them under his thumb, he turned up the heat. Push a little here, a little more there, until suddenly, they were in so deep they couldn't see a way out. And Anna, my wife, had been one of them. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How the hell had I ended up here? I thought about going to the university, blowing this whole thing up. But if Caldwell had been doing this for years and no one had stopped him, that meant he was careful. Too careful. I needed something solid. Something that would destroy him. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went straight to campus. I knew Anna's schedule, where she'd be, when her classes started. And more importantly, when she'd be alone. I found her sitting on a bench outside the main building, staring blankly at her phone. She looked wrecked, like she hadn't slept at all. Good. She didn't notice me until I was right in front of her. Tim. Her voice was small, uncertain. I sat down beside her, keeping my tone even. How many? She blinked. What? I turned to face her. How many girls has he done this to? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I don't know. I exhaled through my nose, nodding. All right. She looked away. What are you going to do? I stared straight ahead. I'm going to end him. If there was one thing I knew about universities, it was that gossip spread faster than wildfire. It didn't take long to find other girls with stories like Lily's. Some refused to talk. Some danced around the truth. But a few were angry. Angry at Caldwell. Angry at the school for turning a blind eye. And those were the ones I needed. By the end of the day, I had 5 names. 5 women, all with eerily similar experiences. Late-night tutoring sessions that felt off. Grades that mysteriously improved or dropped, depending on how cooperative they were. Flirty emails that escalated into invitations. Some had fallen for it. Some had resisted. But all of them had been targeted. I met with them one by one, collecting their stories, getting screenshots of emails, text messages, anything they had. And the more I gathered, the angrier I became. This wasn't just an affair. This was a pattern. A pattern the university had either ignored or covered up. And I was going to make sure they couldn't ignore it any longer. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. Anna was sitting on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, eyes red and puffy. She shot up the second I walked in. Where have you been? I tossed my keys on the counter. Getting proof. Her brows furrowed. Proof of what? I turned to face her. That your professor? Your boyfriend? I spat the word. He's not just some guy who made a mistake. He's a predator, Anna. And you weren't his first victim. She flinched like I'd hit her. Don't, she whispered. Don't call me that. I exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of my nose. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I just need you to understand what he is. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the floor. I already know. The silence stretched between us. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not shame, rage. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice tight. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the folder of evidence I had collected. I'm going to bury him. The next morning, I made my move. I sent everything, every screenshot, every testimony, to Caldwell's department head, the university's ethics board, and a handful of local journalists who had covered similar cases before. I didn't hold back. I named names, gave dates, included everything, and then I waited. It didn't take long for the fire to spread. By noon, it was everywhere. The university had launched an official investigation. Caldwell had been suspended, and the school, they were scrambling. For the first time, people were paying attention. I came home to find Anna standing in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me, stunned. He's done, she whispered. I nodded. Yeah. Her hands shook as she set her phone down. So what now? I met her gaze, my stomach twisting. What now? Now I had to deal with the other betrayal. The one she had committed. Because even though Caldwell was out of the picture, Anna and I, we were far from fixed. And I wasn't sure if we ever would be. By the time the university officially fired Caldwell, the damage was already done. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines popped up everywhere. Scandal at local university. Professor accused of exploiting students. Multiple victims speak out against respected faculty member. And just like that, Matthew Caldwell, the great, charismatic, respected professor, was finished. His career, gone. His reputation, destroyed. His marriage, over. And I should have felt victorious. I should have felt something. But instead, I just felt empty. Because despite everything, the war wasn't over. Not for me. Caldwell might have been the predator, but Anna was still the one who chose him. And I still didn't know what the hell to do about that. She had been acting strange since everything blew up. Quiet. Jumpy. Almost like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I ignored her for the most part, throwing myself into work, avoiding home as much as possible. But one night, I walked in late to find her sitting at the dining table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. Her eyes were bloodshot. Tim. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying. Can we talk? I should have said no. Should have turned around and walked away. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. She let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to fix this. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Neither do I. Her fingers tightened around her glass. I swear to you, Tim, I never meant for any of this to happen. I slammed my palm against the table, cutting her off. Don't say you never meant for it to happen. That's a lie, Anna. Her lip trembled. You chose him, I said coldly. Every single time. You let him pull you in. You ignored the warnings. You kissed him. You kept lying to me while going back for more. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stop. You weren't forced. You weren't drugged. You weren't blackmailed into it. So stop pretending you didn't have a choice. Her face crumpled, and she let out a broken sob. And for the first time in weeks, I felt nothing.
No anger. No sadness. No sympathy.
Just nothing. She wiped at her face. I know I screwed up. I know I lost you. I didn't respond. Because, really? I didn't know if she had or not. Did I still love her? Yes. Did I trust her? Absolutely not. And what the hell is a marriage without trust? She sniffled, looking down. Are we over? The question hit me harder than I expected. Were we? Could I really move past this? Would I ever be able to touch her without seeing him? Would I ever be able to look at her without wondering if she was lying? I opened my mouth, then closed it, because I didn't know, and that scared the hell out of me. I need time, I finally said. I need space. She nodded quickly, like she'd been expecting that answer. Okay, I understand. But did she? Did she really? I pushed my chair back and stood. She flinched when I walked past her. and as I grabbed my keys and headed toward the door, I heard her whisper, "I love you, Tim." I froze. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the doorknob, trying to remember a time when those words actually meant something. Then I walked out without saying a word. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. And at some point, I found myself parked outside Lily's cafe. It was late, but the lights were still on. Through the window, I saw her behind the counter, closing up for the night. Before I could overthink it, I got out and knocked on the glass. She looked up, surprised, then hurried to unlock the door. "Tim," she frowned. "It's late. You okay?" I let out a slow breath. "I have no idea." She studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." And I did, because right now, Anna wasn't the person I could talk to, but maybe Lily was. I sat at the counter of the empty cafe, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I hadn't even touched. Lily leaned against the other side, arms crossed, waiting. "So," she finally said, "are you going to tell me why you're here, or should I just start guessing?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Hell, if I knew, I'd tell you." She studied me for a moment. "It's about Anna, isn't it?" I sighed, rubbing a hand down my face. "Yeah." Silence stretched between us. Then she pulled up a chair across from me, dropping the tough exterior just a little. "You don't have to stay, you know."
I blinked her.
"What?" She tilted her head. "You don't have to forgive her, or fix things, or play the good husband who just sucks it up and moves on. You can walk away, Tim." I stared into my coffee, the words settling like a weight in my chest. I'd spent so much time trying to figure out if I could forgive Anna that I never stopped to ask myself if I wanted to. Did I? Could I? Or was I just clinging to a version of our marriage that didn't exist anymore? Lily must have seen something shift in my expression because she nodded. "You already know what you have to do," she said softly. "You just need to say it out loud." I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I knew. When I got home that night, Anna was sitting on the couch, curled up in a blanket, eyes red and swollen. She shot up the second I walked in. "Tim." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Where were you?" I set my keys on the counter. "Out." Her hands clenched at her sides. Are you coming back?" I took a deep breath. And then, for the first time since this nightmare started, I told her the truth.
"No."
She flinched like I'd hit her.
"No."
I met her gaze. "Anna, I love you. I probably always will. But this," I gestured between us, "this is broken, and I don't think it can be fixed." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can change. I can go to therapy, I can." I shook my head. "It's not about you changing. It's about us. About trust. And I don't have that anymore." She sobbed, covering her mouth with her hands. "I never meant to hurt you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I know. And maybe that was the worst part. She hadn't set out to ruin us. But she had. And now we had to live with the consequences." I walked past her and into the bedroom, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. I threw in some clothes, my toothbrush, the essentials. Anna stood frozen in the doorway, watching, shaking her head. "Tim, please, don't do this." I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. "I already did." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, sobbing. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to hold her, but that wasn't my job anymore. I stepped past her, out the door and into the night. In the weeks that followed, the scandal with Caldwell only got worse. More victims came forward. More lawsuits were filed. He lost everything. And as for Anna, she finished her degree, moved into a smaller apartment. We kept things civil through the divorce, but we didn't speak much. I don't know if she ever really forgave herself. And honestly, I don't know if I ever truly forgave her either. But I do know this. The moment I walked out that door, I finally felt free, and that was enough.